Have you ever wondered, do emotional manipulators ever truly pay the price for what they've done? On the surface, it may seem like they go on unbothered, continuing to hurt others without consequence. But the truth is far more complex. Some pain doesn't scream, it seeps. Some punishment doesn't come from the outside, it unfolds quietly from within the collapse of their own distorted ego. Those who once believed themselves untouchable eventually meet someone they cannot manipulate, a super empath, someone who sees through the mask and refuses to step into the storm of deception. And that's when the real nightmare begins, not for you, but for them. In today's video, you'll witness the 8 most brutal psychological blows a narcissist is forced to endure when they realize their power no longer works. This isn't just a list, it's a mirror reflecting your inner strength, a testament to the silent battle you've fought in a war no one else could see. Hit subscribe and stay with us until the end, because for the first time you may find yourself looking back at your past not with pain, but with a deep sense of pride that you survived. And as for them, they'll never again control your mind. Part 1. When the manipulator loses power over someone they can't control. In the beginning, the narcissist doesn't show up like a raging storm, but like a gentle, captivating breeze. They know exactly what to say to make you feel seen, how to look at you as if you're the only one, how to touch the wounds of your soul with carefully crafted tenderness. They don't love you in the way you understand love. They study you. They analyze your vulnerabilities, your emotional hunger, your longing to be acknowledged, and then they turn those things into tools of control. And you don't see it at first, because love to deep-hearted people begins with trust and openness. You believed that if you were patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, they would change. But in the narcissist's game, your emotions aren't honored, they're harvested. Your pain becomes the fuel that feeds their ego. Every time you cry, doubt yourself, try harder, it reinforces their grip. Until one day, the unexpected happens. You stop breaking. You grow silent. Not because you've become numb, but because you've woken up. You realize the contradictions were never accidental. The broken promises were never mistakes. The apologies never led to change. And instead of reacting, you start observing. You shift from the role of victim to the role of someone who sees the truth. That's the turning point, not in the relationship, but in the power dynamic. And when you awaken, when you stop reacting the way they've come to expect, they panic. Because for a narcissist, control is everything. They're used to turning your emotions like a dial on a radio, turning up the volume when they want you to hurt, muting you when they want you silent, switching the channel when you begin asking questions. But now that radio is disconnected. You no longer dance to the rhythm of their rage. You're no longer pulled into their self-victimizing performances. You begin to pull away, not to manipulate, but to protect yourself. And what drives them mad isn't your anger, it's your calm. It's the look in your eyes no longer searching for answers. It's the sound of your voice no longer trembling, no longer hoping. It's the steadiness of your steps, needing no reassurance, no dramatic closure. The narcissist didn't prepare for this. They expected you to cry, apologize, return. They waited for long midnight messages or the desperate cry, "I can't take this anymore." That's what they wanted, because every time you react, they still exist in your mind. But this time, no, you don't cry, you don't plead, you don't rage, you simply disappear. And to them, that disappearance isn't just departure, it's the death of their power. They try to come back, a cryptic message, an emotional apology, a photo with someone new designed to spark jealousy. They use the same old tactics, but you're no longer the same person. You don't respond. You don't re-enter the game. You take your hand off the table. And when there's no one left to play with, even the best card player is just a lonely figure holding a handful of rotten cards. That's when the real nightmare begins for them. No noise, no obvious defeat. Just the slow, quiet collapse of their control, something they cannot name, cannot fight. Because you don't need revenge, you just need clarity. And for a narcissist, someone who's built their entire identity on manipulating others to maintain a fragile ego, your lack of reaction is the ultimate failure. When you no longer need them to feel worthy, when their reflection no longer appears in your gaze, they don't just lose you, they lose themselves. No one else defeated them. They were stripped bare by the light of truth, left standing alone in front of someone who simply refused to play anymore. That is why a narcissist's greatest fear isn't hatred. It's someone who once loved them deeply and then chose to walk away in silence. Not out of anger, not out of pain, but because they finally understood. Part 2. When the mask falls. Beneath an unfoolable gaze. One of the narcissist's deepest, most hidden fears isn't being hated. It isn't being publicly exposed. It's being truly seen. Not through suspicious glances, not through angry accusations, but through a still sharp, deeply knowing gaze from someone who no longer needs explanations. From someone with a name. The super empath. To most people, the narcissist can easily manipulate perception. They don't just pretend to be good, they perform it so flawlessly it borders on enchantment. They become the selfless savior, the misunderstood victim, the devoted partner who was never loved enough. They control their eyes, select their words, and craft emotional scripts that most people fall for with ease. In doing so, they retain the role, and with it, control. Until they meet someone who doesn't seek evidence, but feels the truth. Someone who isn't swayed by the perfect exterior, but listens to the energy beneath each word, notices the subtle signals behind every action. Someone who isn't reactive to emotion, but has learned how to observe without being pulled in. The super empath doesn't need proof to know something is wrong. They sense the gap between words and behavior. They hear the dissonance in the gentle tone laced with manipulation. They feel the falseness woven into every accidental apology. And that intuitive awareness, undeniable and piercing, is what strips the narcissist bare. Narcissists are used to controlling how others see them. They paint a polished self-image and cling to it as if it's real. But when they feel the gaze of the super empath, a gaze not angry, not accusatory, not condemning, but silent, they begin to panic. Because that gaze says, "I see you." Not who you pretend to be, but the broken, frightened, lost part you've been hiding your whole life. And for someone who's spent their existence running from themselves, being truly seen is a nightmare without escape. Narcissists don't fear being exposed. They always have someone to blame. They don't fear abandonment. They know how to replace. But they fear one thing above all: to be seen and still rejected. They can endure criticism because even that is attention. They can handle fury because intense emotion is still a form of connection. But with the super empath, what they meet is silence. No blame, no rage, just quiet perception and quiet refusal. And that is when the mask falls, not because someone ripped it off, but because it no longer works when no one believes in it. Worse than being hated is being irrelevant. More painful than being left is losing the power to manipulate. More terrifying than being exposed is being seen and no one even bothers to fight back. With the super empath, you don't need to explain why you left. You don't need to list what they did. You simply see and they know you know. You stay silent and they know the performance is over. You walk away and they understand there's nothing left to control. No one screams at them yet, they feel stripped bare. No one condemns them yet, they feel shame. No one attacks yet, they begin to hate themselves. Or more precisely, hate your gaze, the gaze that truly saw them. That's why after you leave, they lie about you. They tell others you were crazy, you changed, you betrayed them. Not because they believe it, but because they cannot bear the truth that you saw who they were, and walked away anyway. Narcissists can handle being hated, but they cannot handle your unshakable calm. They can't manipulate you with tears, can't convince you with reasoning, can't pull you back with memories. You've broken the emotional spell. And you no longer see them as a villain, but as a lost soul. You no longer have the task of saving. For you, it ends with light. For them, it ends with a mirror reflecting everything they never wanted to face. And the thing they'll never forgive you for isn't that you hurt them, but that you saw them and no longer believed in them. Part 3. When they try to replace you but only feel more empty. They once believed you would be just another forgettable name, a face passing through, a shadow easy to leave behind. And when you walked away, they didn't even leave behind a moment of silence. No acknowledgement, no tears, no accountability. Instead, they dived headfirst into a new relationship at lightning speed, as if you had never existed. They took photos. They boasted. They posted sweet captions and curated displays of joy. But every move was calculated not to be happy, but to make sure you saw it. To make you believe you were never special. That you were just a disposable role easily recast. But what they never anticipated was this replacement doesn't heal the real void. Because you weren't just a name. You weren't just a source of supply. You were the one who looked at them without judgment. The one who forgave them far more than they deserved. The one who loved them not because they were perfect, but because you saw the humanity in them, even the parts they had forgotten. With you, they didn't have to perform. But because they couldn't appreciate that, they lost it. And when they turned to someone new, they discovered a bitter truth. The new person wasn't you. They didn't have your healing gaze. They didn't offer your unconditional empathy. They didn't have your near superhuman patience. The new person, even if younger, more attractive, more exciting, couldn't make them feel seen the way you once did. Couldn't touch the core of their being you once held so gently. They began to feel something missing, but couldn't name it. They felt suffocated, but didn't know why. They grew impatient with their new partner, not because that person did anything wrong, but because they weren't you. So they fell back into old patterns. Accusations, demands, playing the victim, emotional control. But this time the new person wasn't as forgiving. The new person had boundaries. The new person demanded respect. The new person didn't tolerate blame or manipulation. And so, they grew angry. They grew disappointed. And they began to miss you not out of love, but because you were once willing to endure. Then, in the stillness of some late night, when even the glow of their phone can't light up their tangled mind, they scroll back through your old conversations. They reread the messages you wrote, full of patience, of love, of silent suffering. They listen to your voice in the old voicemails, a voice filled with sincerity they no longer have access to. Because no one can replace the way you once looked at them. No one else stayed present in the middle of their storms. No one else could sit in suffocating silence and still make them feel safe the way you did. And that's when the truth hits. They once had something rare, and they destroyed it with their own hands. The deepest pain isn't that you're gone. It's that you were once fully there, and they weren't mature enough to recognize it. They'll never admit this. Not publicly. Not to the new partner. They'll keep playing the role, praising the current relationship, faking happiness, fishing for admiration from social media. But inside, they're living off memories. Not memories of control, but memories of a connection they now realize they cannot recreate. And what enrages them most is not that you left, but that you never looked back. You didn't get jealous. You didn't ache. You didn't reminisce. They, the one who once made you dependent, now live in reverse dependency, clinging to feelings no one else can evoke, clinging to memories because the present no longer offers the same value, clinging to the image of you now evolved free and no longer in need of them. What they lost wasn't just a lover. They lost a mirror to their soul, a mirror they once stood before feeling, even if only briefly, like they mattered. But when you left, that mirror shattered. And now every person who follows only magnifies the emptiness inside them, because no one is you and no one ever will be. Part 4. When you leave without blaming them, and that's what they can't bear. They thought you'd explode. They waited for your outburst on social media, your emotional posts, a late-night phone call filled with trembling questions. Why they believed you'd need a reason. A proper apology. A final full stop to close the chapter. Because to them, human emotion is a weapon, and they always win battles where the other side still feels something. But then something happened that wasn't in their script. You no longer needed anything from them. Not an explanation. Not a win. Not an ally. You withdrew quietly, completely, as if they had never been the center of your universe. And that was the moment they began to crack from within. Narcissists live off emotional reaction. The more you suffer, the more significant they feel. The more furious you get, the more powerful they believe themselves to be. The more devastated you are after leaving them, the more they feel they've won. They don't need your love, they just need your inability to forget. But when you walk away without blame, without rage, without the need to prove yourself right, the game ends. There's nothing left to control, no one left to provoke, no emotions to exploit. You're not playing the victim, you don't cast them as the villain. You're not crafting a tragedy to pull in sympathy from others. You're just done. Done hurting. Clear-headed enough to not need them to understand. Strong enough to walk away from a story you once thought would last a lifetime. And what wounds them most isn't your hatred, it's your absence of feeling. You didn't broadcast their faults. You didn't leave a trail of teary tales. You didn't need the world to validate your truth. You didn't need to win. You just needed freedom. To someone who lives off perception, the cruelest thing isn't exposure, it's indifference. They don't fear being hated because they can twist the narrative. They don't fear being criticized because they can play the victim. But what they fear most is the silence of someone who once loved them fully and now doesn't need a goodbye. They sit there watching, waiting for you to speak, waiting for a sign that they still occupy your heart, waiting for an emotional eruption, a dramatic accusation, waiting for you to break the silence. But you don't. You're living, not to prove anything to them, but to heal yourself. You return inward. You tend to the parts of yourself long neglected in the battle to hold together a painful relationship. And the moment you stop making them the center of your emotional orbit, you become their unshakable obsession. They start to wonder, why hasn't she said anything? Is she planning something? Is she pretending to be happy? But the truth is, you're not pretending. You are genuinely happy, not because they're gone, but because you've finally come home to yourself. To them, you were a reactive role, the one who cried, pleaded, argued, returned. But this time, you're playing no role at all. You don't need a dramatic ending. You simply close the door quietly, as if there was never any performance to begin with, and leave the stage. No noise, no public tears, no complicated farewell. And in that moment, their entire false world collapses. They don't know how to respond to your peaceful absence. No audience, no reaction, no stage. They spiral. They try to reignite the drama through indirect messages, through rumors, through flaunting someone new to provoke emotion. But you, the one who once softened, you're not acting anymore. You're not performing, you're living. And what shatters them the most? That you don't need them to narrate your story. That you don't need public validation to know you were right to walk away. That you don't need to beat them because you've already conquered yourself. Part 5. When even those they once manipulated begin to pull away and isolation becomes the cruelest sentence of all. When you walked away, they didn't cry. They didn't collapse into silence. Instead, they returned to their stage, slipping into character with the confidence of a seasoned performer. They re-emerged as the victim. They sought out friends, family, mutual acquaintances, and began spinning a new narrative. You were the problem. You were too sensitive, too cold. You changed suddenly and became someone unrecognizable. They sprinkled in just the right amount of sorrow, just the right quiver in their voice, not to tell the truth, but to stir sympathy. No need for investigation. Just plant the seed of doubt, At first, some people believed them. Because narcissists can lie with emotion. They know when to tremble, when to sigh, when to place a hand on their chest and recount their abandonment with just the right mist of tears. They don't just tell the story, they live inside it. And in their minds, you were supposed to be the one left isolated. You'd be shunned by the people who once trusted you. You'd be whispered about, second-guessed, quietly judged. They thought you'd scramble to explain yourself. Try to reclaim your reputation. Fight for the approval of the crowd. But once again, you did the unexpected. You didn't argue. You didn't defend. You didn't correct every accusation one sentence at a time. You stayed silent. Not because you weren't hurt, but because you were too tired to keep fighting battles made of words. You knew the truth. And you let time do what arguments never could reveal. In the beginning, they seemed to win. A few took their side. Some mutual friends didn't know whom to believe, and because they were louder, more dramatic, more persistent, they appeared more convincing. But over time, your silence began to speak volumes. You didn't lash out. You didn't retaliate. You didn't dig up the past. You moved forward. You healed. You grew. And those who once listened to their sob stories started to wonder, why don't you seem like the cruel person they described? Why are you still composed, respectful, quiet? Why haven't you fought back? Why haven't you even responded? And when the contrast becomes too stark to ignore, the doubt begins to shift direction. People who once nodded along begin to drift away. No one confronts the narcissist directly. No one calls them out in public. But little by little, messages go unanswered. Plans stop being made. Conversations become dry, reduced to one-word replies or empty emoji reactions. Silence begins to surround them. And they, once the master of the spotlight, find themselves suddenly alone. A narcissist doesn't fear being hated. They know how to twist hate into attention. They can always become the victim of misunderstanding. But what they cannot survive is being irrelevant. Isolation doesn't arrive like a sentence. It creeps in like fading stage lights, dimming one by one. No one announces their withdrawal of trust. They simply stop showing up to hear the story. And that's when desperation sets in. They try to reignite attention, provoking you, accusing you of being difficult, insisting everyone's been talking about you. But no one listens anymore. No one is interested in a play they've already seen too many times. No one wants a seat in a theater filled with the same tired monologues. They are left behind in silence, not condemned, not confronted, just ignored. And that is the bitterest pain of all. Not being hated, not being challenged, but having no audience left. No gaze to reflect their carefully curated image. No one left to validate their role as the wounded good one. No more tickets sold to the story they crafted with deception. All that remains is them alone facing the fractured truth of who they are when there is no one left to perform for. Part 6. When you stop reacting according to their script and their mask slips off in silence. They were used to a certain type of partner, the kind willing to follow the script they wrote. Someone who always forgave their wrongs. Someone constantly afraid of abandonment, desperate to please, clinging to the hope that if I just love enough, things will change. You were that person once. Not because you were weak, not because you were naive, but because you loved with sincerity. You believed in the healing power of love, believed that if you were kind enough, patient enough, they would change. And they knew that. They exploited it like an actor needing an audience to keep the performance alive. They crafted elaborate apologies, played the wounded soul, trying their best, timed their tears perfectly to soften your heart. They controlled the narrative. You reacted. They performed. A quiet loop, draining only for you. Until one day, something shifted. You started noticing the contradictions. You recognized the repetition. You realized you couldn't love enough for two people. That each time you yielded, they didn't become grateful, they grew more confident in their power. And so you began to stop. No more arguing, no more explaining, no more pleading. Just an inward retreat, a kind of silence not born from suffering, but from no longer needing to engage. And that is when they began to panic. Not because they loved you, but because you dismantled the stage. No reaction equals no power. You no longer played the wounded lover. You no longer cried. You've changed. You no longer asked, "Why am I never enough?" You simply looked at them with awakened eyes and a heart that no longer believed. They tried everything: the abandoned act, the repentant act, the trauma act. They reassembled the same scene, but this time there was no co-star, and they began to unravel in their own performance. A narcissist doesn't live through who they are. They live through how others reflect their false self back to them. They need your tears to be the savior, your anger to be the victim, your pain to be the noble sufferer. But now, you give them nothing. No tears, no reaction, no stage. You exit the story not with a dramatic declaration, but with the quiet finality of stillness. And that is where they truly break. You didn't declare war. You simply stopped caring. Without you in the role of the hurt one, they no longer have a mirror to reflect their fabricated self-image. No one to make them feel important, needed, lovable. And that is the collapse of the ego. They become confused. They become angry. They spiral into desperation. Not because they lost you, but because they lost who they were in your eyes. You no longer saw them as the center of your universe. You stopped trying to heal them, stopped trying to understand them. You weren't cold. You weren't vengeful. You were simply gone. To you, they once felt like a missing piece. But now you see clearly that wasn't love. It was dependency. It was manipulation disguised in sweet words and staged sorrow. And when you stepped away, you didn't need to announce your freedom. Your peace spoke for you. They don't know how to face that. They keep replaying the old performance, but the audience is gone. There's no one left to control, no one left to punish, no one left to apologize to, no one left to restart the cycle with. You stepped out of that circle, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally saw things too clearly to keep pretending you didn't. Your calmness is the ending they can't accept. No one took their power away. They lost it the moment you stopped playing by the script. And that is the most devastating blow to the ego they spent their entire life building. English translation. Part 7. When they start to feel guilt and there's no one left to blame. The narcissist is a master of denial. They are never wrong. They are never the one who caused the pain. They always have a reason, a backstory, a tragic past, or someone else to blame. As long as they never have to face the truth about themselves, they build a fortress of excuses. If you're hurt, it's because you're too sensitive. If you're sad, it's because you expected too much. If you're exhausted, it's your fault for not knowing how to love properly. Everything is cleverly twisted so they can still play the victim. And then, you walk away. No drama, no chaos. No grand emotional finale. Just a calm, decisive decision. I can no longer lose myself for someone who refuses to grow. You don't seek revenge. You don't expose them. You don't publicly call them out. You don't turn your pain into a campaign for justice. You choose dignity. And that very maturity leaves them directionless. Because for the first time in their life, they can't write a story that helps them escape the truth. You gave them no script to continue the act. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't react with rage. You didn't force them into the role of the victim. And in that silence, free from accusations, they begin to feel something unfamiliar: guilt. Not the kind of guilt that leads to growth, not the kind that sparks genuine remorse, but a quiet internal fracture because with no one left to blame, they're forced to look inward. They begin to wonder, did I push away someone who truly loved me? They didn't scream, they didn't accuse, they just left and never came back. Could it be I'm the one who was wrong? For an emotionally healthy person, this might be a moment of awakening. But for a narcissist, it's an identity crisis. Because their entire belief system is built on denial of mistakes, of responsibility, of reality. They don't know how to process the idea that they might be the one who caused harm. They don't know what to do with the discomfort of guilt when no one is accusing them. They don't know how to survive in the light of truth when there's nowhere left to hide. And you, with your calm silence, with the way you walked away without hate, you held up the one mirror they've always avoided, their own conscience. That part of them they buried under masks, manipulations, and performance, the part they never dared to face. But you, the one who never needed to accuse, never needed to speak, you awakened it. No one condemned them. No one wrote exposés. No one turned their friends against them. Just you, quietly, peacefully forced them to see a truth they could no longer cover. They have nowhere left to run. No lie left convincing enough to fool themselves. No scapegoat left to absorb the blame. And in that silence, guilt becomes an obsession. It doesn't strike like lightning. It doesn't roar. It seeps in slow, relentless, and quiet. It creeps into the stillness of night. It appears in the eyes of people who start to doubt their stories. It echoes in old texts you once sent, in memories of words once spoken, in the sudden realization that you were never the problem. You were the only one who saw the good in them, even though you never had to. You were the only one who stayed when you should have left long ago. You were the only one who gave second chances, a third, a 10th. And they, through neglect, cold ego, and fear of facing themselves, destroyed it all. Now you're gone. No resentment, no regret, no hatred. And that one thing they can't control is what finally breaks them. Guilt with no one left to blame is the harshest version of reality a narcissist can ever face. No one hurt them. They simply saw themselves clearly, and that is the one thing they were never prepared to do. You've walked a journey. Not everyone will understand. But you are the one who must understand its value. You are not weak for having loved a narcissist. You are not foolish for believing in their promises. You were simply a sincere heart that once believed love could reach even the most closed-off soul. And that is nothing to be ashamed of. That is something to be proud of, because you loved deeply, because you forgave more times than you should have, and most importantly, because you had the courage to walk away. You stepped out of a relationship that felt like a trap, without weapons, without vengeance. You walked away with the only thing you truly needed, the awareness that you deserve peace. And that peace, it doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation. It lives in every step you take forward, in every dream that no longer ends in nightmares, in every morning where you wake up without needing to look back to remember your worth. Maybe they never admitted they were wrong. Maybe they never felt guilt in the way they should have. But that no longer matters. What matters is you didn't let them keep writing your story. You reclaimed your freedom not through chaos, but through powerful silence. And if you've ever doubted yourself, take a look back. Not everyone has the strength to retreat without screaming. Not everyone can forgive, then let go and keep living without needing recognition from the one who broke them. But you did. And you deserve to be proud of that. If you see yourself in these words, if you're anywhere along the path of breaking free from manipulation, remember this: you are not alone, and you are not weak. You are just learning how to be strong without having to be loud about it. If what you've just heard touched your heart, hit subscribe so you won't miss future videos where we don't just expose the truth about toxic relationships, we help you reclaim yourself after the storm. Because you didn't just survive, you woke up. And that is the quietest, yet most powerful victory a once broken heart can ever achieve.